Let's start with our first source this morning.
So my source was instructions of Hardedef. Is that how you say that?
Hardedef.
Hardedef. Okay, so the instructions of Hardedef, also known as these two things, teaching of Hardedef and teaching of that lovely word. So it belongs to the didactic literature of the Egyptian Old Kingdom, and I put the definition of didactic there because I didn't know what it meant, so I thought you guys might not know either. But it's a philosophy that emphasizes instructional and informative qualities in literature and other types of art. All right, so the instructions that Hardedef gives are brief, and it's one of the earliest preserved instructions. So even though it's small, short, it's one of the earliest ones. And they were written during the 5th dynasty, according to Miriam Lichtenstein, a famous Egyptologist. Okay, so who is Hardedef? He's also known as Hardedef, one of the important men of wisdom and calm judgment of the 5th dynasty. His teachings were famous in ancient times, and his name appears in the Westcar Papyrus, which is an ancient Egyptian text containing 5 stories about miracles performed by magicians and priests. Okay, so Prince Hardedef, son of Cheops, who built the Great Pyramid at Giza, was seen as a sage by later generations. And then the instruction that he gave is one of the earliest examples of this genre of literature, and he may have truly been the author of this piece.
So make it very early.
So since it's really short, I just put it all up here so we could read together. So the beginning of the instruction, which the hereditary prince and count, the king's son Hardedef, made for his son, whom he raised up, named Aubrey. He says, "Reprove yourself in your own eyes. Take care that another man does not reprove you. If you would be excellent, establish a household and acquire for yourself a caring wife, that a male child will be born to you. May you build a house for your son, for I have built for you the place where you are. Equip your house in the necropolis and make excellent your place in the west. Accept this maxim, for life is exalted for us. The house of death is for life. Seek for yourself a field holding which becomes inundated for writing, to till, to fish, and to hunt." So that is the whole thing. It's pretty short. But only a few segments from the beginning of the text have survived, on a handful of New Kingdom ostraca, which is pottery broken off of a vase, and a late period wooden tablet as well. So the instructions are addressed to his son, Aubrey, and it advises him to build wisely for his future. He suggests that his son should reprove himself so that another man does not reprove him. And he suggests that he finds a caring wife that will provide him with a son. He suggests building a house for his son just as he did for him, and tips for how to make his house great. So the instructions have a long tradition in literature to come, and a passage is even cited by that. How do you say that? Tahotep. I'm so sorry. These words are so hard. Okay, so there are also similarities. I tried to find similarities between the instructions and the Bible. So a difference is that in the Bible, if someone is reproving you, it's okay. And so, like, I pulled out Proverbs 27:17 and says, "Iron sharpens iron." So that's kind of like where it's okay to, like, you want someone that's going to, like, sharpen you and reprove you. So it's not like, do it yourself so someone else doesn't. And then also Proverbs 31 talks about qualities of good wife, just like the instructions say to find a caring wife. But Proverbs 31 goes into more detail.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Any questions there? Yeah, you can just leave it up. Any questions? Let me just say a couple things. You're all right. Let me just say a couple things about. A couple things about this. First of all, notice that she has multiple, you mentioned multiple sources, right, from different periods. The text itself would be very old, from the Old Kingdom. Because if it was written by Hardedef, then this dates to around roughly 2500 BC. Where the texts are found, for example, you said it's found only in fragments, so there was probably more to this that we don't have. And it was on a handful of New Kingdom ostraca. Now, ostraca, you know, we have, if you want to write something, we have lots of ways, lots of things you can write on, right? You can write on the back of an envelope, you can write on a little note card, you can write on note paper, you know, there's lots of paper laying around for us. The Egyptians didn't have that. They did have papyrus, but it was expensive, and most people didn't have it, certainly not for readily available all the time. And so they would actually use broken pieces of pottery, not only the Egyptians, but a lot of ancient people. Let's say you have a cook pot or whatever you have, it breaks, now you've got a piece of pottery, you know, this big. You pick it up, hold it in your hand, you can write on it with ink. Right? And that's what they're doing. So that's what an ostraca is. And ostracas, an ostracan is one. Ostraca is plural. So an ostraca, ostraca, I want to put an S on it, multiple ostracans, right, which is ostraca, would have all kinds of different things on it. It could have a shopping list. It could have a business receipt. It could have a letter or a note that you're writing to another person. This actually has a copy of this, and it says you have, you know, there are a few segments from the beginning of the text. We know it's the beginning because they're identifying who he is, and it's on a handful of ostraca, right? And notice a late period wooden tablet, which the late period is much later. We're talking, getting closer to the Hellenistic period. So notice that. First of all are the sources, and this is a good way to do it. Kind of what she did is, okay, identify who is the person being addressed or who wrote it, sort of, you know, the who of it, and then the purpose, the why. Why was this being written? It's an instruction. It's didactic. Didactic means to teach, to instruct. This is meant to train somebody. You know, I'm writing this down to show you how to do something. Right, or whatever. So kind of like a manual or something like that, right? So you get a computer manual, first thing you do is you throw that away, and then start using your computer and playing your games. But you know, like with most things, people don't want to read the manual. But that's what this is. That's didactic. So it's a style of writing. It's not a story. It's not a song. Some of the things we'll have will be hymns or songs. Some of them will be sort of about religion, like legends or myths. So that's another way, just like if you take a literature class, all right? There's one thing about history. History is actually about everything, right? If you want to have one topic that's about everything, it's history. History encompasses anything that people did in a period. And so, like in a literature class, you have different genres, different types of literature, and this is poetry, this is is that, and we look at it this way. The Egyptians, of course, most people don't think of their literature in that way. That's an analysis that comes later. To say, oh, now I'm going to read a hymn. Right? So let's group all those hymns together. That's a bit artificial to group them like that. I mean, it's useful for study, but it's not really the way people thought about it at the time. I don't think, oh, well, I hear a song on the radio. Okay, that's kind of a poem, a song, lyrics. I hear something else during the day. During the day, I hear a variety of literature. So it's good to figure out what type of literature this is for any of your sources. It's good to figure out when it was written. It's good to figure out, if you can figure out why. Was there a purpose for why it was written? And then the sources. Because one of the things that's true about ancient, like for example, if we were studying modern history, that modern history. Much like journalism. You got, you're not detached from it because it's happening basically right now, right? Like that Civil War. It was only 150 years ago. You don't have enough detachment from it to really analyze it. That's what I always tell the American history people. They're just mainly journalists, but they don't like that. But at any rate, so I try not to tell them too often. But anyway, you need to know when it happened, right? Why it was written, and the period in which it comes. Okay. But one thing that's different, like I was saying, in modern history, you're overwhelmed with sources. Let's say you want to study something that happened in the 1940s or the 1950s. Your problem is not going to be finding sources. Your problem is going to be, I got so many sources, I don't know what to do. Okay? For example, I researched once, because I was kind of told to in a graduate course, the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. Now, you maybe have never heard of it. So when I start to research it, since I'm kind of an ancient history guy, but I had to study other history too, my first inclination is to gather all the sources that I can, read them, and then try to figure out what happened. You cannot do that in modern history. You'll never get past gathering and reading. That could take you years. So if you're ever going to get, say, a paper done in a semester, you're going to have to figure out a plan. But that's not so in ancient history. Like you said, we've only got what do we got? You got it all up here, right? We got 4 sentences, 5 sentences is all we have. And that's coming from a handful of ostraca and a wooden tablet, and that's all we have. So whatever we want to know about this is that. Now, we can look up about Cheops, which is also called Khufu, because we know he built the Great Pyramid. We can find some things, but we have limited knowledge about him. It's the same guy. And this is his son. So we can get some information that way. But we can pretty much gather all the information we have, all the sources that we have. We really want to do that in anything you're doing. This is with your papers as well. Because what you're going to find is there's limited original sources. You want to look at those original sources, if at all possible. And there aren't that many of them, usually. Right? So this is one of the problems of being an ancient historian, is finding enough sources to sort of fill out. You're always wondering, I wish I had this, I wish I had more, I wish I could find this. We just don't have it. Are you sure we don't have it? And you search for it. No, I can't find anything. So that's one of your things, is just trying to find the sources. In modern history, you're overwhelmed by sources, and what you have to do is limit yourself. When I did that 1956 Suez Canal crisis, United Nations was around. There was all kinds of United Nations stuff. There was the U.S. Congress. There was British records. There were French records. There were Egyptian records. There was popular newspaper articles. There were, popular books. There's no way I could even list everything. Editorials, all sorts of things that were written about it. People who were fighting in it mention it in their, like their biographies. And so it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming in a different way because you have so many sources. And there what you have to do is sort of figure out a strategy of what you're going to look at or how you're going to look at the sources. Here, one of the challenges is finding the sources. So I wanted to say that. I chose yours to do it because I think it's clear. So what you did, I think, was good. You gave us, the title of it. You told us what kind of literature it belongs to, right? That's good. That's a good way to do it. And then you gave us the sources. This is interesting. The 5th dynasty, right? So that's early on. I assume this is a picture of one of the Astrakhan, right? Yeah. So there you can see the broken piece of pottery with them writing on it. And then you gave us who is this person, right? Who wrote it? He gave us some information about that. Then he gave us the text itself. Then he gave some analysis of it. Okay, and then the sources. So that's a good job. Yeah, any questions? Certainly.
It doesn't look like, is it hieroglyphics? Is it hieroglyphics or is it some kind of other form of writing?
It's demotic. It's called demotic. If you look at the Rosetta Stone, for example, can I leave this? Can I do it? I don't know. And see if we can get a good image of that. Not the program. No, we don't want that. How about this? Wait, how about? Is this a good one here? Maybe this one. See if that's good enough resolution for us. Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, let's see if it'll get bigger. Well, I guess it's not. All right. If you look, I don't know how. Full size view. Let's see. All right. So you see this down below. Up here, the Rosetta Stone is in 3 parts. The top part's in hieroglyphs, which are pictographs. And we're going to talk more about the language later, but this is a good time to mention it. The middle part is demotic, and that's what it looks like this ostraca is in demotic. The bottom part is in Greek. So this is why the Rosetta Stone was so valuable. It gave us a Greek text that matches the demotic text, that matches the hieroglyphic text. Now, demotic is Egyptian, and so this is 2 languages, 3 scripts. Does that make sense? Greek and Egyptian, but the Egyptian's written in 2 different ways. And part of the reason that this was developed, it's called demotic, it was sometimes called a priestly language or whatever. The priests needed to be able to write faster than they could by making all, like drawing out all the hieroglyphs. And so they made this kind of script, shorthand of the hieroglyphs. But it's the same language. So that's what you're seeing in her, in the picture she had.
Is that the same kind of thing that happened to Chinese text?
It's a bit like that, yeah. The Chinese text has a kind of a shorthand text to it as well as the pictographs. Yes. Yes?
When did they move to doing phonemes?
To doing what?
To doing phonemes.
Well, yeah, that's pretty early on, actually. I'll have to do a whole thing on language. But yes, what they start off with is a pictograph which is representational, right? You're going to represent the sun. The sun then is a circle, right? Circles are kind of hard to carve into stone. So are some of these images. So a lot of the stuff gets angular sometimes. But then that also then becomes a sound. And that's pretty early on. That let's just take our word sun. If we said our word was sun and we represented it by a circle, and we said, okay, that means sun. Then we could make that be a compound, like sun plus something might mean day. It also could then be a sound. So for us it would be the S sound. S, right? And then you could put that sound with other sounds, and you could then create other words which are hard to represent pictorially. New kinds of words that don't have that are compound sign. Does that make sense? That's, I think, what she's talking about. That starts pretty early on. It's certainly there by the Old Kingdom. I'd have to look and see exactly when it started. But it starts pretty early on because it's pretty natural that it would. All right. We've got to move on. All right. You can just hit the space bar there. Here's our next one about the story or the tale of Sinuhe.
All right. I can say mine was about the story of Sinuhe. So first, let's start. To begin, like basically, that's the story Senua is mostly found in like tombs and statues of the stele around like stele. Okay,
Yeah.
stele. But one of the things, like, there's no Senua that has really lived, so it's kind of like one of the legend of it. But it's one of the great story literature of ancient Egypt. Now, Senua was a official of the queen. Basically, the queen was the wife of Sin was said the first, and he is the basically he was the so basically him the son, he's the son of the pharaoh, which is gonna come out pretty soon. So this is one of the like writing that I saw like of that story. All right. So now, how the story started is how
I like that. It's nice.
okay, I kind of like do it a little bit. All right. So how the story started is this pharaoh Amenhotep the first, right?
Yep.
Okay, Amenhotep the first. He was the actual king, and during that time, and words got out that the king has died, and there was some kind of conspiracy that it was to be murdered. Now the son, which was Senwosret the first, who got words of that. Now he became the pharaoh. Now Senua, who was one of a high official of the court. Now he's starting, like, because there was a conspiracy about how the previous pharaoh died. Now he's trying to like panicking, and then on his panicking he fled. He fled Egypt and starting to wander around the whole Egypt. Now around all these years I was wandering around, he meets a chief of Upper Retinue, and I believe this it's part of Palestine and Syria.
So
And
he leaves Egypt and he goes to Palestine.
Palestine, yeah. So this chief admired how basically Senua how he was like back in Egypt, kind of like his basically like he's known story about Senua, so he admired Senua, and then invited Senua to come and lives in his land, offer land for him to live in, and he offered also him to marry his oldest daughter.
That's quite a bit of hospitality.
Oh yeah, and then it kind of Senua also briefly there was a challenger that came in to challenge Senua, and that's like been and Senua's been living there for quite a while now, so he got to challenge this challenger and went into battle, so which mean that he had to defend a land that wasn't his land. Now whenever Senua is starting to get older and basically nostalgic about his homeland, and he writes to the pharaoh now, which is Senwosret the first. Yeah, so he wishes that he wants to go back home, and tells and with a big a long version of it. So what I got from it is just that his wishes of how he misses home and everything, and the pharaoh replied back to him, and he also in his letter he also tells him how, like, his adventure of how what he did with and it's where he was, and the Pharaoh he replies back and say, hey, this is he received them with open arm, and tells them, like, he's very appreciative in how, like, he conduct himself outside of Egypt, and let him come in and receive them. And one of the big thing that he gave him, he also let build a big royal tomb for Senue. So this is how, and then Senue comes back to Egypt, like very honorably, and died in his old age, and got buried in one of those royal tombs. So it's pretty much a short version of me for the story.
Good job. I don't know why you're so worried. Any questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I will say this about, Senue, the tale of Senue, I think is a great story. One of my favorites. Now, one of the things that maybe you didn't realize is that the story of Senue is often compared with, especially this part, where he's defending the land. It's compared with a story in a Bible. Can anybody think of it? Well, Moses, because he flees, but this part, remember what he said, someone comes into the land and then they have a challenger, right? They pick a champion. David, yeah, right? David and Goliath. So this story is often compared to the story of David and Goliath because it's taking place in Palestine, and it's the idea, if you read the story of David and Goliath, the skeptic might say, well, why would the Philistines just choose one guy and his Israelites choose one guy and they fight, and that's going to settle the whole thing, right? But this was a custom, and here we see it in the story of Senue, where a champion is chosen from each side, and they fight one another. Okay, so maybe we could try that in modern times, right? We just get Putin and somebody else. They just one-on-one fight.
It's a high gamble, but it might result in fewer people dying, to be fair.
Well, sure. You're only going to have one die.
Right away.
Well, people have to agree to the rules. Right? We'll put the Donald Trump in there with the Putin, and just whoever wins, they win. That's it. We got to submit. All right. All right. Abby will talk to us now about our next source. Enthusiasm. I like enthusiasm.
I did it with one person.
I know you have to. You want to show favoritism? All right, go ahead.
So, I did my first source on the Stela of Tajidi. That's okay. So, the Stela of Tajidi was a limestone kind of slab, pretty much, that was found in Tajidi's tomb. It's kind of an example of an autobiography, and once we look a little bit at the text, it'll kind of make sense as to why. It's written very favorably about the person who it's about, so it kind of leads us to believe that it was either written by him or someone who was very fond of him. Yep. And so it contains the titulary or set of titles of not Tajidi, but the kings that he served under. So a little bit about the timeline of when it was created. So
I like that. You got the pyramid as a pointer.
Yes, the pyramid is going to be kind of like Pyramid of Khufu, the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, that's
kind of our
very
starting
creative.
point there.
That's good. I'm going to have to get you to do all my PowerPoints.
So, as you can see, it's kind of right towards the end of the intermediate period that the stela would have been kind of written about Tajidi. He kind of was towards the last pharaoh that would have been in the intermediate period as you're about to start the Middle Kingdom.
Right. Okay.
So that would have been around the 11th dynasty. So the first part of the stela is that top half that you saw earlier, and that's there on the right. And that is going to be 14 lines of hieroglyphics that are written in a very expository and narrative kind of style. They are explaining who Tajidi was, what kings he served under, gave the titulary of those kings, and then kind of gave the story of Tajidi and how he was promoted and raised in rank. So the first kind of part, which is probably about the first 2 lines, is sort of written in third person, talking about Tajidi and talking about Intef II, which was the first pharaoh he served under. And then it kind of switches to a more first person, where it's almost Tajidi talking about himself, talking about how he was loyal and a loving servant, and how he did his job proficiently and efficiently, which are 2 words that two kind of like concepts that are repeated throughout the entire
Proficient
upper
and
books.
efficient.
He was proficient and efficient in his job as kind of like
I don't even know if I'm either one of those.
But he was, it talks about how he was in charge of Intef II's treasures. So anything that was given to the pharaoh from either the Redlands or kind of the desert, or people who lived in the area that Intef controlled, would have given gifts to the pharaoh, and Tajidi was in charge of kind of keeping track of them and answering the kind of requests of people who came to the king as well. So some of the important information that Egyptologists were able to get off of the stela was where the kingdom that Intef kind of established was geographically, because it describes, when it's describing Intef, it also describes the most northern point of his kingdom and the most southern point of his kingdom. So on here it talks about how the kingdom went from Abydos to, I believe it was... Yeah, Abydos to... Elephantini. In the actual text, they use a different word. I believe it was Yabu, something along those lines.
Okay. Yeah.
But this is kind of the word we would have, the name that it would have been known by more currently. And it was right at the first cataract, and that would have been kind of the extent of Intef II's kingdom. His order and titulary of the kings was also something that kind of helped establish the order of Intef I and Intef II in ruling. And it also kind of tells us where the borders were of that kingdom before Egypt was more reunited in the Middle Kingdom.
Where is it?
So
It's way down there at the bottom.
from here, and then that's the first cataract.
Yeah.
So then just a little bit about Intef I and Intef II. We learned a lot about Intef II on the stela, because more is described about him, which kind of leads one to believe that Tajidi served a lot more time under Intef II than he did under Intef III, because it describes his role and his job very specifically when it talks about Intef II, but when it gets to Intef III, it just kind of says, and he served the same role under Intef III and did it proficiently. So that's a little bit...
But not efficiently.
Not efficiently, just proficiently that time.
Slacking up.
So then the other part of the stela on the on the vertical inscriptions, was 5 lines that contained 2 prayers for Tajidi, pretty much in the afterlife. So the first one was a prayer for offerings, kinds of things that he was going to hope to have with him in the afterlife, things he would hope to be able to take. And so a brief excerpt of that is that first one. He was hoping for an offering of 1,000 bread and beer, 1,000 oxen and fowl, the offerings of the funerary meal, and for the overseer of the treasure of Tajidi. So it's just kind of a short list of some things that were in that first prayer. And then the second one, may he ascend to the great God and arrive in peace at the beautiful west. May the desert open to him in his arms and the west offer its hands to him. And so this kind of brings back up that idea of the west being that place. Okay. It kind of brings up that idea of the west being the place where the dead would go in the afterlife. That idea that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And so that's just a little bit of the prayer there, hoping that his Ka would have safe passage into the west so he could continue on in the afterlife. The last kind of part of the stela was there was on that bottom right portion sort of a almost self-portrait of Tajidi, what he kind of either thought was his ideal body image or somewhat close to his body image. And it included a large figure of himself and two figures of people who were subordinate to him. So almost like servants that he could continue to have in the afterlife. Oh, and then I wanted to mention, see if I can make it go back. All these kind of pictures over to his right are not exactly hieroglyphics. They're just also another kind of almost picture list of things that he would have hoped to take with him into the afterlife.
Okay. That's good.
So then kind of what was the overall thing that we got from the stela? We learned the location kind of Intef's the Second's kingdom. We got the titularies of both Intef the Second and Intef the Third. We kind of got a little glimpse into the spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians at that time, what kinds of things they would have wanted to take with them, what they believed about the afterlife, and how they kind of used a lot of euphemisms about the West and moving on. We learned a little bit about the geography, the order of the kings, what the two kings' names were in that dynasty, and we also got a little bit of artistic value from the inscription picture and the religious texts.
All right.
And
Very
then
good.
some sources.
Thank you, sources. Okay, thanks a lot. Any questions? I think we have one more, right? Oh, we got plenty of time. No problem. What's the matter? Well, we can, we continue on next time, but I hate to take it till then because we still have 5 minutes. I think you. Is this one yours? Oh, this one's yours. Here. If it'll actually open, there it is. Okay. Go ahead, and if you need more time on Monday, you can have it. How's that sound?
You'll be able to throw the maximum overdrive.
Yeah, right. All right, so as you can see, I did mine on the Old Kingdom autobiographies. Basically, there were 3 autobiographies of the Old Kingdom that were mentioned in the book. These were 3 significant, important texts from, I believe, the 6th dynasty, from what I was reading. Why they were significant is because they were basically in places that were not considered to be royal. Places in Abydos on the west side of the Nile, as well as in the Upper Egypt. So those are some of the locations of these autobiographies, or they were located at. Okay, so the first one here, we have Weni the Elder. Weni was a man that was described as selfless, self-effacing, and an effective royal servant. So basically, you could say someone that had basically had a servant's heart, basically. And as he was growing up as a youth, he was basically served under the reign of King Pepi I, and was what the book described him as the archetypal Egyptian gerontocrat. I don't even know really what that is. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, no, I think it's. I'm not sure. Not sure about that word. I think it has to do with the one who sort of goes through the ages, right? So it carries on from one age to the next. But we'll keep.
Okay.
We'll check it out.
So he basically served until his death, which was about past the age of 70, and I guess he served under someone else with Merenere. So, all right. So, this is the autobiography that I found when I looked it up for what was found for Winnie the Elder. I believe that's hieroglyphics, right? Yeah, so.
Yes.
Okay, second one, Harkov. During Harkov's time was the overseer of the Southland royal seabearer, sole companion, lector priest, and an overseer of the foreigners. So basically, he had his, I would consider him to be more of a governor, not a pharaoh, but a governor over a certain part of land. Harkov requested that when he died, he would be buried in the western necropolis of the western desert and was considered to be very gracefully old when he died. And that, I believe, is the tomb of Harkov right there, where they found his autobiography at. And I believe this is also his autobiography that they found. So, okay, Car. Now he was one of the monarchs of the Idifu at the end of the Old Kingdom and was located in the southernmost region of Nome. And as growing up as a youth, he was the sole companion under King Pepi, and he was also received education as well as other children of the magistrates during this time. And this was the site where they found his autobiography and also was known as his burial site during this time. So, and I'm not really sure if this was the autobiography of Carr. This is just what I found when I looked up his autobiography. So his autobiography is not quite as known to the public. So that's basically
images from his tomb.
Images from his tomb. Okay. So I know that was a little bit short, but I had to go quick. But here's the works cited page for the book that I found this in. All right, thank you guys.
Wow, you still have a minute.
Still have a minute. That's great.
Do you have any questions? All right, be sure you sign up for your sources, and we'll see you next time.